My name is Elena, and for over 70 years, my farm was my pride, my legacy, and my gift to the family I raised with love and sacrifice. I thought my grandson Daniel, the boy I cradled in my arms when his parents left him with me, would protect it. But after a month in the hospital, weak, fragile, and longing for home, I returned to discover the unimaginable. Daniel had given away my farm to his wife's family. Before we continue, kindly hit the subscribe button, leave a comment below, and let me know where you're watching from. Have you ever been betrayed by those you loved most? Share your story below. I remember the smell first. After a month locked away in the sterile corridors of the hospital, where everything reeked of bleach and despair, I longed for the warm, earthy scent of home. As the taxi turned down the gravel path to my farm, my heart beat like a drum. Each bump in the road was familiar, almost comforting, like the pulse of the land itself calling me back. I gripped my cane a little tighter, whispering to myself, "You made it, Elena. You're finally home." But when the farmhouse came into view, I froze. Strange cars, sleek, polished, too shiny for this dusty old road, were lined up in the yard where Daniel used to chase chickens as a boy. I blinked, thinking maybe I was mistaken. Perhaps the neighbors had stopped by to welcome me home. But the laughter that drifted through the open windows wasn't familiar. It was sharp, high-pitched, echoing in a place where usually only the wind and birds held court. The driver helped me out, and as my cane pressed against the ground, I felt the soil under me. I expected comfort. Instead, it felt distant, like a stranger shaking my hand with a cold grip. I took a slow breath and looked around. The garden I'd tended with such love, where roses once framed the walkway, was overgrown, the blooms choked by weeds. The wooden bench I used to sit on was pushed aside as though in someone's way. My chest tightened. Hadn't Daniel promised me he'd water them every morning? Hadn't he sworn to keep the place just as I left it? "Home," I whispered. But it didn't feel like mine anymore. I steadied myself, climbing the porch steps. The wood creaked, but even that sound felt different, complaining rather than welcoming. My hand reached for the door handle, worn smooth from decades of use. I half expected it to be warm, as though it still remembered me. Instead, it was cold. I pushed it open. Silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of being unwelcome. The kind of silence that presses against your ears until you feel your own heartbeats growing louder. I stepped inside, leaning heavily on my cane. The air smelled different. Not of bread baking, or the faint sweetness of dried lavender I always kept in bowls. No, the air was laced with perfume I didn't recognize, mixed with the faint tang of cigarette smoke. My throat tightened. I should have felt joy, relief, gratitude for being alive, for being home. But instead, unease crawled over my skin like a shadow that wouldn't lift. My homecoming felt more like trespassing. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement at the far end of the hallway. A figure, standing still, watching me. What I felt in that moment was more than unease. It was the first chill of betrayal. But I didn't know yet just how deep it would cut. The hallway echoed beneath my steps, each tap of my cane sounding louder than it should, as if the house itself were amplifying my unease. I paused at the threshold of the living room. bracing myself for the comfort of familiarity, the worn sofa where Daniel used to curl up with his school books, the rocking chair where I spent countless evenings knitting, the shelves lined with framed photographs that told the story of our family. But what greeted me instead was emptiness. The furniture had been rearranged, pushed into strange, unnatural angles. My rocking chair was gone. In its place stood a sleek armchair, its leather still smelling new, out of place in this humble farmhouse. The shelves were bare, dust lingering where the photo frames once stood. My breath caught in my throat as my eyes scanned the walls. The pictures, our history, were missing. No photo of my late husband smiling in his overalls. No portrait of Daniel as a little boy with jam smeared across his cheeks. No faded family gatherings captured in golden sunlight. The walls looked stripped, as though someone had scrubbed the memory right out of them. I reached out, my fingers brushing the wooden shelf where the photograph of my wedding day had always stood. My hand trembled. Where is it? Who would take it? Then I noticed something worse. On the coffee table, a scattering of magazines with glossy covers, fashion spreads, bold headlines, nothing I would ever buy. A child's toy truck sat on the rug, bright red plastic that squeaked when I nudged it with my cane. My brow furrowed. This wasn't Daniel's. There were no children here. Whose child had played in my home? The air, too, was different. Gone was the familiar blend of cedarwood from the old floors and the faint sweetness of apple pie I used to bake. Instead, the room reeked of air freshener, too sharp, trying to mask the stale odor of cigarettes. It stung my nose. I sank slowly onto the edge of the sofa, not my sofa, I realized now, but a new one, stiff and unwelcoming. My knees ached as I lowered myself, but it was the ache in my chest that made me clutch my hand to my heart. I felt like a stranger here, an intruder in the very space I had built from nothing. I should have seen it coming. The signs were everywhere. The laughter of strangers outside, the polished cars in the yard, the missing photos. But a part of me refused to accept it. I wanted to believe this was still my home, that Daniel had kept it safe for me, that I had a place here. Yet as I sat in that lifeless room, surrounded by unfamiliar belongings, one thought hammered in my mind, over and over. Where is my family? And why does it feel like they've erased me? I was still sitting on that stiff sofa, trying to steady my breath, when I heard footsteps coming from the kitchen. My heart leapt. Finally, Daniel. My sweet boy, the one I raised as my own. Surely he would explain everything, clear away this fog of unease. Grandma, he said, stepping into the room. His voice carried the right word, but not the right warmth. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. His lips curved, yet his gaze darted quickly across the room, as though he couldn't look at me for too long. I pushed myself up, leaning on my cane, aching to hug him. But when I opened my arms, he hesitated. Just for a second. Long enough for me to notice. He gave me a quick, tight embrace, the kind a stranger might give out of obligation. My chest sank. Behind him trailed Marissa, his wife. Her perfume hit me before her words, floral, but too strong, as if she were trying to drown out something less pleasant. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, adjusting a bracelet on her wrist, her shoulders stiff. "Welcome back," she murmured, almost under her breath. That was it. No smile, no hug, no warmth. Just two clipped words that stung more than silence. I searched their faces for answers, for reassurance, but all I found were walls. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his hand brushing through his hair the way he always did when he was hiding something. Marissa's eyes flickered around the room, never landing on mine, as though I were a ghost she didn't quite want to see. Everything looks different, I finally said, my voice breaking the heavy stillness. My gaze lingered on the missing photographs, the strange furniture, the child's toy left on the rug. Where are all the family pictures? Daniel's smile faltered. We thought it was time to update things a little. Give the house a fresh look. His words were rehearsed. Too quick, too tidy. Update. Fresh look? My wedding portrait, my husband's face, my life's memories gone, all in the name of updating? My cane trembled in my grip. Marissa cleared her throat. We wanted space. The old things made the place feel cluttered. Her tone was flat, dismissive, as if the years I'd poured into making this house a home were nothing more than dust to be swept away. For the first time, the truth began to dawn on me, not just suspicion, but a chilling certainty. This was no longer my home. I was standing in someone else's design, someone else's plan. I lowered myself back onto the sofa, though it felt harder now, sharper, as if even the furniture rejected me. My heart whispered a question I dared not ask out loud. Why do I feel like a guest in the very house I built with my own hands? That night I could not sleep. The hospital had left me restless, used to the constant shuffle of nurses and the beeping of machines. Here, the house was quiet, too quiet. A silence heavy enough to press against my chest. I lay on the narrow guest bed Daniel had offered me, not my room, not my quilt, but a strange one that smelled faintly of mothballs and Marissa's perfume. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks like veins, when a sound broke the stillness. At first, just the creak of floorboards, then voices, low, urgent. I held my breath, straining my ears. She doesn't remember everything, Marissa hissed. Daniel's reply came softer, but sharp enough to slice through the wall. Keep your voice down. If she hears, I sat up slowly, my pulse quickening. My cane rested against the bed frame. I clutched it, grounding myself. Who were they speaking about, if not me? Papers, I heard it then. Marissa again, more insistent this time. The papers are already signed, Daniel. What else do you want? You can't go back now. Signed. My throat went dry. What papers? Daniel groaned, his voice muffled but trembling. I just don't want her asking questions. She start digging through drawers. You know how she is. A cold wave washed over me. Drawers, my drawers. Where my land deeds, my will, my most precious documents were kept. Locked now, though I had never locked them in my life. I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling the frantic thud of my heart. My grandson, my Daniel, speaking as if I were the intruder, the threat. And Marissa? Her tone was too polished, too confident, as though she had practiced these lines many times before. Once it's official, she whispered, the farm is ours. My family will take good care of it. Ours. My ears rang. The room spun. I wanted to storm out, to confront them, to demand answers. But my body felt heavy, my legs weak. The truth was still tangled, half heard through walls, and I wasn't ready to hear the final blow. Not yet. I needed to be sure. So I lay back down, heart pounding against the mattress, every nerve on fire. Their whispers carried on, fading into sharp fragments. Money, future, don't tell her. I squeezed my eyes shut, though sleep would not come. Instead, my mind replayed every sacrifice. Every night I had worked my hands raw to keep this farm alive, also Daniel could inherit it one day. And now, papers, signatures, hours. I should have seen it sooner. I should have known the moment I stepped into that empty, unfamiliar room. But I had clung to hope. Now, as their whispers melted into silence, one truth remained. Something precious had already been taken from me, and I feared the worst was yet to be revealed. As I lay awake that night, their whispers echoing in my ears, my mind slipped backward, years peeling away like pages from an old diary. Sometimes, when betrayal cuts deep, the only way to understand it is to revisit the roots, the moments where love was planted. I was 29 when I buried my husband. The day still comes to me in fragments, the smell of damp earth clinging to my dress, the hollow sound of dirt striking the wooden coffin, and the way my fingers refused to unclench from the rosary beads I gripped until they left marks in my skin. I had no time to mourn. The farm demanded attention. The animals still bleated for food, and life mercilessly carried on. Not long after, Daniel arrived. My daughter, his mother, left him on my porch, swaddled in a blanket, his cries piercing the night air. She whispered a rushed goodbye, guilt painted across her face, and disappeared into the darkness. I never saw her again. He was only a baby, fragile, helpless, and from that night on, he was mine. I remember the first time I cradled him against my chest. His tiny fingers curled around mine as though he knew, even then, I would be his anchor. I whispered promises into the soft fuzz of his hair, that he would never know hunger, that he would never feel abandoned again, that this farm, the soil I broke my back for, would one day belong to him. The sacrifices began quietly, like drops filling a bucket. A skipped meal so he could have seconds. Clothes mended until the fabric was more patch than cloth. Long nights spent mending fences by lantern light, my body aching but my spirit refusing to yield. Each season brought new struggles, droughts that cracked the earth, storms that threatened to wash it all away, but I endured, because Daniel's laughter was worth it. I see him now in my mind as a little boy, running barefoot across the fields, his cheeks flushed with sun. He would tumble into my arms, smelling of grass and sweat, and giggle as though the world were nothing but joy. Every seed I planted, every furrow I plowed, I did with him in mind. I wasn't just growing crops, I was growing a future for him. There were nights when exhaustion wrapped around me like chains, and I would wonder if I could keep going. But then I'd look at him sleeping soundly, his tiny chest rising and falling, and I'd remind myself, you must. He needs you. That weight, the weight of sacrifice, was heavy, yes, but it was also sacred. It was what gave me purpose. And now, lying in this unfamiliar room, hearing whispers of papers and signatures, I felt the bitter sting of those promises unraveling. By morning, my chest felt heavy with words unsaid. The whispers of the night before still clung to me, but I decided not to strike at shadows. I needed clarity straight from their mouths. My cane clicked softly against the floorboards as I made my way to the kitchen, where Daniel and Marissa sat with their coffee. The rich smell of roasted beans mixed with something sharper perfume, and cigarette smoke and aroma that felt foreign in my kitchen. I paused in the doorway, watching them. Daniel's shoulders were hunched, his eyes fixed on his mug. Marissa sat straighter, tapping her manicured nail against the ceramic rim, a rhythm that grated on my nerves. I cleared my throat. "Daniel," I began, my voice low but steady. "Where are the photographs? The ones on the walls. And the furniture, why has everything been moved?" His head jerked slightly, as if the question caught him off guard. He blinked at me, then looked down again, avoiding my eyes. That silence, it spoke louder than words. Before he could answer, Marissa gave a small laugh, light and dismissive, the kind people use when brushing off something unimportant. "We're making space, Elena," she said smoothly, crossing one leg over the other. The house felt cluttered. We thought a cleaner look would be nice. Cluttered. The word cut through me like a blade. Those weren't just knickknacks or dusty frames. Those were decades of love memories captured in glass and wood. My husband's smile. My daughter's fleeting presence. Daniel's childhood. Pieces of me gone. I gripped my cane tighter. Those pictures were not clutter. They were our family. My family. My voice cracked, but I held it steady. Marissa's lips pressed into a thin smile. She didn't reply, only sipped her coffee with deliberate calm. Daniel shifted in his seat, rubbing the back of his neck. "Grandma, maybe it's just time for a change." His words were soft, but his eyes still refused to meet mine. A change. As if the life I had built with blood and tears could be rearranged like furniture, discarded like old curtains. The ache in my chest deepened. I leaned on my cane, letting the silence stretch. My gaze fixed on Daniel, the boy I had raised, the boy who once clung to my skirts, begging me not to leave him alone. Now he couldn't even look at me. I felt small, dismissed, like an unwanted guest sitting in a house that no longer bore my name. I turned away, afraid my tears might betray me. But inside, a question burned hotter than ever. If photographs and furniture could vanish so easily, what else, what greater part of me, were they planning to erase? That afternoon, I forced myself to busy my hands. The house no longer felt like mine, but if I could clean, straighten, put things in their place, maybe I could trick my heart into believing I still belonged here. I made my way to the study, the room where I had spent countless evenings balancing farm accounts, writing letters, and recording harvest yields in thick, worn ledgers. The air was stale, as though no one had bothered to open the curtains in weeks. Dust clung to the desk, once polished smooth by years of my touch. I reached for the top drawer, my drawer. Inside, I had always kept the farm's most important documents, the deed, the tax receipts, even my will. A lifetime's worth of proof that this land was mine. My hand trembled slightly as I pulled the handle. It didn't budge. I frowned, tugging harder. It resisted, the wood groaning but holding firm. Confused, I leaned down and peered closer. A small, shiny lock glinted back at me from the drawer's edge. My heart stopped. I never locked it. Not once in all these years. That drawer had always been open to me, because what reason would I have to guard myself from my own family? I tried again, the knob rattling under my grip. Nothing. My pulse quickened. A flush of heat spread across my chest as realization slithered through me. Someone had locked it. Someone had taken the key. Someone had decided that I no longer had the right to open the very place where I had safeguarded my life's work. Straightened slowly, the cane trembling under my palm. My eyes darted around the room. The bookshelves were too neat. Papers stacked in sharp, foreign order. Even the pen holder looked different, filled with cheap plastic pens instead of the fountain pen my husband had once given me. I sank into the chair, staring at that locked drawer as if it were mocking me. All I could hear were Marissa's words from that morning. We're making space. Space for what? For whom? Space for what? For whom? I pressed my palm flat against the desk, whispering into the dust, "This is mine. This has always been mine." The wood was cool beneath my skin, unyielding, indifferent. For the first time since coming home, fear outweighed my anger. The documents inside that drawer weren't just papers, they were my protection, my proof, my voice. Without them, I was nothing more than a guest clinging to memories. I sat there for a long time, listening to the distant murmur of Daniel and Marissa's voices drifting through the house, muffled and careless. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. What else had they locked away from me, and how far were they willing to go to keep me out? I sat there staring at that locked drawer, my hand pressed against its cold surface, when the memories came rushing back, not gentle or nostalgic, but fierce, like waves crashing against a shore. I was 24 the first time I stepped into that field as its owner, though owner was too grand a word for what it was then. The land was stubborn, wild, half swallowed by weeds. The barn leaned sideways, its beams groaning, threatening to collapse with the next hard wind. The neighbors told me I should sell, that it was too much for a young couple like us to handle. But I was stubborn too. I told my husband, "This land will feed us, it will raise our children, it will bury us when the time comes." We worked day and night, our sweat soaking into that soil like baptism water. I can still feel the blisters on my palms from hauling timber, the sting of rope burn as we dragged beams into place to rebuild the barn. That barn wasn't just wood and nails, it was proof of our will to survive. I remember the sweet smell of hay filling it for the first time, the echo of my husband's laugh bouncing off its walls when we danced inside, tired but proud. The weight doubled, but I refused to let go. When the bank threatened foreclosure during that cruel winter, I stitched clothes for neighbors, sold eggs by the roadside, and worked until my bones ached just to scrape together the money to keep it. Some nights I'd fall asleep at the kitchen table, pen in hand, ledgers open, my face pressed against numbers that never seemed to add up. But somehow, by dawn, I would rise again, tie a scarf over my hair, and head back out into the fields. I think of the storm that tore half the roof from the barn. I was alone then. The rain poured through the open beams, soaking everything. Instead of despair, I grabbed buckets, tarps, anything I could find, climbing up in the middle of the night with the wind howling around me. I remember my hands going numb from cold, my body shaking, but I nailed down those tarps myself. I saved that barn, Every scar on that land has a piece of me in it. Every furrow, every fence post, every corner of that house carries my blood, my tears, my laughter. That farm isn't just property, it is my very breath. And now, the thought of losing it, of strangers walking where my husband once stood, where my little Daniel once ran barefoot through the fields, it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Asterisk, if they've touched those papers in my drawer, if they've dared to lay claim to my farm, then they are not just stealing land. They are stealing my life itself. The next morning, sunlight streamed weakly through the curtains of the small guest room, but it brought me no warmth. My body felt heavy, and yet something pulled me from sleep, a sound that did not belong here. Laughter. Loud. Unrestrained. Unfamiliar. I pushed myself upright, my cane scraping against the floorboards as I made my way to the window. Pulling the curtain back, I froze. There, on my land, strolled people I had never seen before. 3 men and 2 women, their clothes too polished for farm work, their hands gesturing freely as though they were surveying land they already owned. My farm. One of the men pointed toward the old barn, his voice carrying in the crisp morning air. We could tear that down, build something modern here. Maybe even a second house. Tear it down? My barn, the one I had saved from storms, rebuilt with my own hands, dismissed with a wave as though it were scrap. Another voice chimed in, a woman's this time. She laughed, tossing her hair back. And look at all this space. Perfect for expansion. Imagine what we could do once everything is finalized. Finalized. The word made my stomach twist. My grip on the curtain tightened until the fabric wrinkled beneath my fingers. I pressed closer to the glass, listening, my breath fogging the window. Marissa was right, one of them said. This place has potential. Her family deserves it more than some old woman who can't even take care of it anymore. The words hit me like a blow. Some old woman. As if I were already gone, as if my blood and sweat meant nothing. I staggered back from the window, my knees buckling until I sank onto the edge of the bed. My cane rattled as it slipped from my grasp. The laughter outside grew louder, mingling with the sound of their shoes crunching on the gravel path, the same path Daniel had once raced down, barefoot, chasing fireflies. My land was no longer being walked with reverence. It was being measured, judged, divided like spoils. I pressed a trembling hand to my chest, struggling to steady my breath. How easily they spoke of destroying what I had spent my life building. How casually they erased me from the story of my own home. I thought of Daniel then. My sweet boy raised from infancy in these fields. Did he know? Was he standing out there with them? Or worse, was he the one who had invited them here? The voices outside grew faint as they moved toward the barn, their words lost on the wind. But their laughter lingered, echoing in my ears like a cruel refrain. It was in that moment I understood. My fear wasn't just suspicion anymore. My farm was already slipping into their hands, and I was running out of time to stop it. House was quiet later that afternoon, unnervingly so. Daniel and Marissa had gone into town, leaving me alone. Or perhaps they simply didn't want me underfoot while they carried on with their plans. Either way, the silence pressed around me, heavy and suffocating. I moved slowly through the rooms, searching for comfort where none remained. The photographs were still gone, the furniture still foreign, but it was the trash bin by the kitchen door that caught my eye, a corner of crumpled paper sticking out, like a secret trying too hard to stay hidden. I bent down, my knees protesting, and pulled it free. The paper was creased, smudged, as though someone had handled it carelessly, yet my eyes locked immediately onto the words printed in bold at the top: Transfer of Ownership Agreement, *. My breath caught. My hands trembled so violently that the paper shook like a leaf in a storm. I forced my eyes to read line by line, even as my vision blurred with tears. The address. My address. This farm. My home. The buyer. A name that made bile rise in my throat: Marissa's brother. And at the bottom, scrawled in ink that I knew as well as my own handwriting, was Daniel's signature. For a moment the room tilted. My cane slipped from my grip and clattered against the floor, echoing in the emptiness. I clutched the counter to steady myself, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out every other sound. I read the line again and again. My Daniel, my boy, the one I had fed when there was nothing left in the pantry but scraps, the one I had held through fevers, nightmares, heartbreaks, had signed away the very ground beneath my feet. My vision swam. The words blurred into streaks of black. I thought of my husband, of the barn we had rebuilt, of the fields I had sown with aching hands, of the laughter of a barefoot child racing across them. All of it sold, discarded, reduced to a transaction. The paper crumpled in my fist as I sank onto a chair. Betrayal is not a sharp stab, it is a slow crushing, a weight that makes it hard to breathe. I could almost hear their voices from the night before, the whispers about papers and signatures. And now the truth sat in my hands, undeniable. I pressed the paper against my chest, rocking slightly, as if trying to hold on to something that was already gone. My world wasn't just shifting, it was collapsing, and the pieces were falling into the hands of strangers. When Daniel returned that evening, I was waiting for him in the kitchen. The crumpled document sat on the table between us, like a viper ready to strike. My cane leaned against my chair, my knuckles white as I clutched the edge of the wood. He walked in with a casual air, but the moment his eyes fell on the paper, his shoulders stiffened. His smile faltered. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What is this?" He didn't answer right away. He rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous tic he had carried since boyhood. "Grandma, you weren't supposed to see that." The words sliced through me. Weren't supposed to see. As if betrayal was easier in the dark, hidden from the light of my knowing. I rose slowly, my legs shaking but my gaze steady. "Tell me it isn't true. Tell me you didn't give away this farm." He sighed, sinking into the chair opposite me. His fingers drummed nervously against the table. Finally he muttered, "I did. I signed it over. To Marissa's family. It's done." The silence that followed was deafening. I felt as though the ground had opened beneath me, as though all the years of sacrifice had crumbled into dust. Why? The word came out strangled, barely a breath. Daniel leaned forward, his voice taking on a defensive edge. "To secure our future. Mine and Marissa's. You've worked this land your whole life, Grandma. But times are changing. You wouldn't want it to fall apart after you're gone." I staggered back, pressing a trembling hand to my chest. After I'm gone? As if I were already dead, he pressed on, his words growing harder, more rehearsed. You always said you wanted me to have a good life, to build something for my family. This is it. You would have wanted this. Wanted this? My throat burned with disbelief. My lips quivered as I tried to form the words. I wanted you to have this farm, Daniel. To protect it. To cherish it, not to sell it like a broken tool. His jaw clenched. He looked away, unable to face me. The tears I had fought so hard to hold back finally broke free, trailing hot down my cheeks. My boy, my grandson, my flesh and blood, the one I had sacrificed everything for, had sold my life's work. I sank back into my chair, my body trembling. My heart felt like shattered glass, the pieces cutting me with every beat. The truth was out. The betrayal was no longer a whisper, no longer suspicion. It was real, and it wore my grandson's face. I sat there trembling, the documents still between us, like a wound that refused to close. Daniel's words, "You would have wanted this," echoed in my ears, crueler than any blade. My chest ached with a grief I could not contain. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice raw. "Look at me." He hesitated, then lifted his eyes. For the briefest moment, I saw the boy he used to be, wide-eyed, tender, clinging to me in the dark when nightmares came. And then, just as quickly, that boy was gone, replaced by the man who now sat across from me, a stranger in my grandson's skin. "Do you remember?" I asked softly. "The nights when you woke up crying, calling out for your mother?" "She wasn't here, Daniel. She left you. But I held you until you fell back asleep. I whispered to you that you weren't alone, that I would never leave you." He said nothing. His fingers tapped restlessly against his knee. I leaned forward, tears blurring my vision. "Do you remember when you were 12 and your shoes were too small, your toes bleeding from blisters? I gave you mine, Daniel. I walked barefoot so you could walk in comfort. I skipped meals so you would never go hungry. Every sacrifice, every drop of sweat I shed, it was for you." Still silence. His eyes darted toward the door, as though escape would be easier than facing me. "Please," I begged, my voice breaking. "Don't let this be who you are. Don't erase everything we've shared. This farm, it isn't just land. It's our blood, our memories, our home. How could you give it away?" For a long moment, I thought he might cry. His lips trembled, his shoulders stiffened. My heart raced with fragile hope. But then he looked at me, his expression hardening into something I didn't recognize. "Things change, Grandma." Just 3 words. Cold, final. They landed heavier than any storm I had ever weathered. I recoiled as though struck. My cane slipped from my grasp and clattered to the floor, but I barely heard it. My ears rang with his voice, the callousness of it, the way he dismissed an entire lifetime of devotion with a shrug of inevitability. I searched his eyes for the boy who once called me Mama. Elena, the boy who promised to take care of me when I grew old. But that boy was gone. In his place sat a man who had already buried me in his heart. I covered my face with trembling hands, sobs racking my body. The pain wasn't just in losing the farm, it was in losing him, and as my tears fell, I realized the truth. The greatest betrayal wasn't the sale of my land. It was the silence of the child I had raised as my own. After Daniel left the kitchen, I remained at the table, staring at the place where his hand had rested only moments before. My tears fell onto the wood, small dark spots spreading like stains that would never wash away. His words, "things change," cut deeper than the crumpled paper on the counter. And as I sat there broken, my mind fled backward, searching desperately for the boy I once knew. I saw him as a child, no older than 5, running barefoot through the fields, the summer sun painting his hair gold. His laugh carried across the farm like music, the kind of sound that made all my aches vanish. He would chase the chickens, his little legs wobbling, and then collapse into the grass, rolling with unrestrained joy. "Mama Elena," he used to call, his small voice ringing with trust and love. He never called me Grandma when he was little, no. To him I was mother, protector, home. I would scoop him up in my arms, smelling the sweet mixture of soil and sunshine clinging to his skin, and he would rest his head against my shoulder with the contentment of a child who knew he was safe. There was the memory of winter evenings, too. The fire crackling low, the cold wind rattling the windows, and Daniel curled against me beneath a wool blanket. His cheeks rosy, his eyelids heavy, his tiny hands clutching the edge of my apron. I'd hum softly, rocking him until his breathing slowed, his lips parting in sleep. In those quiet hours, I would whisper promises into the top of his head, promises of a future, of love unbroken, of a home that would always be his, even in his teenage years. When the weight of abandonment sometimes made him sullen, he would still come to me. I remember the night he scraped his knee falling from the old oak tree. He tried to be brave, tried not to cry, but when I bandaged him, his tears spilled freely. He pressed his forehead into my shoulder and whispered, "Don't ever leave me, Mama Elena." That memory burned now, sharp and merciless. How could the same boy who once begged me never to leave now be the man discarding me as if I were already gone? The clash of past and present tore at me like claws. The laughter of the child collided with the cold indifference of the man. His promise of loyalty lay shattered against the reality of his betrayal. I pressed my hand to my heart, whispering into the emptiness, "Where did you go, my boy? What happened to the child who once loved me?" The Daniel I raised felt like a ghost, and the stranger who bore his face was preparing to bury me under his greed. In the days that followed, I began to notice how small my world had become within the very home I had built. My footsteps no longer echoed with belonging. They shuffled along hallways where whispers followed me like shadows. When neighbors came to the porch, kind souls who had known me for decades, their smiles carried warmth. "Elena, we heard you're back. We wanted to see how you're feeling." I felt a flicker of comfort, a reminder that I was still seen, still remembered. But before I could open my mouth, Daniel appeared at the door, his body filling the frame like a barricade. "She's tired," he told them quickly, his hand resting firmly against the door as though to keep them out. "She needs rest." I tried to speak. "No, I'd love to see them," but my voice was drowned out by the sound of the door shutting, the bolt sliding into place. Their footsteps faded away down the porch steps, leaving only silence. I stood there, trembling with anger, but what stung more was the shame. Shame that I, once the matriarch of this farm, was being treated like a fragile inconvenience. As though my very presence were an embarrassment to be hidden away, Marissa's relatives only deepened the wound. They walked the house as if it were theirs, their voices carrying without restraint. One evening I passed through the living room and heard one of them mutter, "She moves so slowly. It's pathetic." Laughter followed, careless and cruel. Another day, as I tried to set the table, Marissa gently plucked the plates from my hands with a forced smile. "You'll just drop them, Elena. Don't worry. We'll handle it." Her words dripped with false sweetness, but her eyes held no kindness. She wasn't helping me, she was erasing me. One small act at a time. I began to feel like a ghost, drifting through rooms that no longer welcomed me. My chair at the dinner table was quietly shifted further down. My voice in conversation was brushed aside, drowned by louder tones. Even my presence in the fields was met with sighs of impatience, as though I were an intruder slowing down their plans. At night, I would sit by the window, staring at the land I once commanded with pride. Now it stretched before me like a stage where I was no longer invited to perform. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and whispered into the dark, "I'm still here. I exist. This is still mine." But even my own voice sounded faint, as though the walls themselves no longer believed me. Erased from my own legacy, I realized the fight was no longer just for the farm, it was for my very dignity. And soon, an unexpected ally would remind me I was not as alone as they wanted me to believe. It was Rosa who found me. Sweet Rosa, my neighbor of nearly 50 years, who had stood beside me in storms and harvests alike. One afternoon, when Daniel and Marissa had gone into town, I heard the familiar sound of knuckles rapping gently against the back door. I opened it to find her standing there, her scarf tied tight against the wind, her eyes sharp but kind. She glanced around quickly, then stepped inside, lowering her voice as if afraid the very walls might betray us. "Elena," she whispered, gripping my hands in hers. I couldn't stay quiet any longer. Her touch was warm, but her words chilled me. "I was at the market yesterday," she continued. "I heard Marissa." She was laughing, telling the butcher how her family will finally take over this farm. She spoke like it was already theirs. I sank into the nearest chair, my knees weak. My heart hammered so loudly I feared Rosa might hear it. She said that? Out loud?" Rosa nodded grimly. "Clear as day. She bragged that Daniel had signed everything, that soon you'd have no say at all. She said you'd be out of the picture." Rosa's face twisted with disgust at the words, "out of the picture." The phrase cut deeper than a knife. It confirmed what I had feared since that first night of whispers. I wasn't losing my home by accident. I was being pushed out deliberately, piece by piece, until nothing of me remained. Tears blurred my vision, but Rosa squeezed my hands tighter. "You're not imagining this, Elena. You're not crazy. They're planning this together. But you mustn't give up. That land is yours. You fought for it. Don't let them erase you." I covered my face with trembling fingers. For so long I had wondered if my mind was simply playing tricks, if grief and age had made me suspicious. But Rosa's words burned away the doubt. This was no misunderstanding. This was a scheme, calculated, cruel. "I raised him," I whispered through my tears. "I gave him everything. And still, He handed me away like I was nothing. Rosa leaned close, her voice fierce. Then you must fight, Elena. You're stronger than they think. They've underestimated you, and that's their mistake. Her words lit a spark in me, faint but alive. A reminder that I was not yet defeated, not yet buried. As Rosa left, her scarf flapping in the wind, I clutched the edge of the table with renewed determination. My heart still ached, but now it beat with purpose. The time for silence was over. If they wanted to erase me, they would have to face me first and soon. The dinner table would bear witness to a confrontation they would never forget. That night, the dining room felt colder than usual, though the stew on the table still steamed. Marissa's family had joined us, their voices loud and careless, filling the air with chatter about renovations and plans for expansion. Each word gnawed at me. My hands trembled in my lap, but not from weakness. This time, it was from the storm rising inside me. I had spent days in silence, enduring their cruelty, their laughter, their erasure. But Rosa's words had ignited something. Tonight, I would not shrink into the background. Tonight, they would hear me. I steadied myself on my cane and pushed back my chair. The scrape of wood against the floor silenced the table. All eyes turned to me. My heart pounded, but I forced my voice to rise above the thundering in my ears. Enough, I said. My voice quivered at first, but it grew sharper with each syllable. Enough pretending. Enough lies. Daniel's fork froze halfway to his mouth. Marissa's smile tightened into a thin line. Her relatives exchanged quick glances, annoyance flashing in their eyes, as though I were interrupting their celebration. I leaned on the table, my knuckles white against the wood. I know what you've done, I whispered, my gaze fixed on Daniel. I know about the papers. I know about the signatures. You gave away this farm, my farm, to strangers. A hush fell. The only sound was the faint crackle of the fire. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his face pale, his lips pressed tight. I turned my eyes to Marissa, who sat straighter, her chin lifted as if bracing for attack. You bragged in town, I spat, my voice breaking. You told the world this land would be yours, that I would be out of the picture. Do you think I'm deaf? Do you think I'm blind? Her smirk faltered. For the first time, she looked unsettled. I slammed my palm against the table, my cane rattling at my side. Was my love worth nothing to you? I demanded, my voice shaking but fierce. Every night I stayed up hungry so you could eat, Daniel. Every day I broke my back so you would have a future. Was all of that nothing? Daniel finally looked at me, his eyes wide, his lips trembling as though words sat heavy on his tongue. But none came. Silence was his only answer. Tears streamed down my cheeks, hot and unrelenting. I gave you my life, and in return, you sold it to strangers. My voice cracked, but I did not look away. Tell me, my boy, was I ever more than a stepping stone to you? The room was thick with tension, every pair of eyes fixed on me, every secret laid bare, and in Daniel's silence, in Marissa's narrowed eyes, I saw the truth. Something had begun to crack, and the breaking point was near. The room was heavy with silence after my words, the kind of silence that seems to choke the air itself. My tears fell freely, splashing onto the tablecloth, soaking into the fabric like stains that would never wash away. Daniel's eyes lingered on those tears. For the first time in weeks, he didn't look away. His fork slipped from his hand, clattering against his plate. His chest rose and fell, uneven, like a boy trying to catch his breath after running too far. "Grandma," he began, his voice fragile, uncertain. My heart lurched. Was he finally seeing me? Was the boy I raised still buried somewhere inside him? But before he could finish, Marissa's hand shot across the table, gripping his wrist. Her nails dug into his skin, her smile thin but sharp. "Don't let her guilt you, Daniel," she said firmly, her voice slicing through the moment like a blade. "We're doing the right thing. This is for us, for our future. Don't forget that." Daniel's eyes darted to her, then back to me. The muscles in his jaw tightened. I could almost see the war inside him, the loyalty he owed me battling the promises he had made to her. I leaned forward, my voice breaking. "I'm not asking for money, Daniel. I'm not asking for riches or comfort. I only ever wanted one thing, that the farm, our home, would remain ours. That everything I gave up for you would mean something." My tears glistened under the lamplight. They weren't weakness. They were truth, raw and undeniable. And for the first time, Daniel seemed to recognize that. His face crumpled, shame flooding his features. He covered his mouth with his hand as though trying to dam a flood that could no longer be contained. Marissa hissed, tugging his arm. "Don't you dare back down now. She make you feel guilty, and then where will we be? My family has already planned everything. You can't undo it, Daniel." But he was no longer listening to her. His eyes stayed locked on mine, wide and wet, like a child caught in the act of breaking something precious. Only this wasn't a vase or a toy. It was me. It was my life. "Grandma," he whispered again, his voice cracking this time. I didn't think." His words trailed off into silence, but his face said what he couldn't. He hadn't realized what betrayal truly cost until now. My heart ached with a strange, bitter mixture of pain and hope. His guilt was there, visible and raw. But would it be enough to undo what had been done? As Marissa's grip tightened and Daniel's eyes filled with tears, I knew the battle for his soul and for my farm was reaching its final, desperate hour. That night, after the storm of words at the dinner table, I sat by the window, staring at the moonlit fields. My body was drained, but my spirit refused to break. For weeks I had been silenced, erased, treated like a shadow of myself. But Rosa's words echoed in my mind. "Don't let them erase you." The next morning, I asked Rosa to come by. She arrived with determination in her step and a fierce light in her eyes. She carried a small notebook tucked under her arm, the kind she always used for bookkeeping. "Elena," she said as soon as she stepped inside, "it's time to fight." I wanted to believe her, but fear gnawed at me. "What can I do?" "They already have the papers. Daniel signed them. What power do I have left?" Rosa leaned closer, lowering her voice. "More than you think. I spoke to someone in town, a friend who knows the law. If Daniel signed anything while you were in the hospital, he had no right. Unless you gave him power of attorney, and I doubt you did." My heart skipped a beat. "Power of attorney." I shook my head, my voice trembling. "I never gave him that. Never. Not once." Rosa's lips pressed into a thin line. Then he forged it. And if he forged it, the transfer isn't valid. A good lawyer can tear it apart. For the first time in weeks, a spark of hope flickered in my chest. Small, fragile, but alive. I straightened in my chair, my hands gripping the armrests as if pulling myself back from the edge of despair. With Rosa by my side, I made the call. My fingers shook, dialing the number. My voice quivered as I explained everything to the lawyer, a kind man with a steady tone that steadied me in return. I told him about the hospital stay, the missing documents, the sudden transfer. He listened, then said firmly, "If what you're saying is true, Mrs. Elena, this can be challenged. We will need proof, but forged signatures leave trails." When I hung up, I pressed the receiver to my chest, my eyes filling with tears. But this time, they weren't only of grief. They carried relief, determination, even defiance. The farm was not gone. Not yet. The earth outside my window seemed to breathe again, whispering to me like an old friend, "Fight, Elena. You still belong here." I turned to Rosa, my voice steadier than it had been in weeks. They thought I was weak. They thought I'd lie down and let them bury me. But they forgot who I am. The battle for my land was no longer theirs alone. It was mine. And I would fight until my last breath to reclaim it. The day of reckoning came sooner than I expected. The lawyer moved quickly, gathering evidence, comparing signatures, and uncovering what I already knew in my heart. Daniel had forged my name. My trembling hands had never touched those papers. The law at last was on my side. It began quietly. A letter delivered in the morning, folded neatly but heavy with authority. Marissa opened it at the kitchen table, her painted nails tapping impatiently against the envelope. Her eyes scanned the words, and the color drained from her face. She slammed it down and hissed, "They're challenging it." "She's fighting back." Daniel picked it up, reading slowly, his lips tightening with every line. His shoulders slumped as though the weight of his choices had finally settled onto him. He didn't speak. Not at first, but Marissa did. Her fury spilled like venom. How dare she? After everything we've planned, after everything I promised my family. I stood in the doorway, cane in hand, my back straighter than it had been in weeks. "Everything you planned?" I said coldly. "You plotted. You schemed. You forgot that this land was never yours to take." Her eyes narrowed, but before she could retort, Daniel spoke. His voice cracked under the strain. "She's right." Marissa spun on him, her face twisted with rage. "Don't you dare turn soft now. This is for us, for our future." But Daniel's gaze was on me, and for the first time in months, I saw shame written across his face. His lips trembled. He couldn't meet my eyes for long. I should never have done it," he whispered. "I thought I was securing something. But all I did was destroy everything." The fight drained from me then, replaced by a deep, weary sorrow. "You didn't just betray me, Daniel," I said softly. "You betrayed yourself. You betrayed the boy you used to be." The legal process moved swiftly after that. Marissa's relatives, puffed up with entitlement, were served notices. Their voices rose in outrage, shouting about rights and plans, but the law silenced them. One by one, they packed their bags, their cars kicking up dust as they drove down the gravel path, leaving behind only the echo of their bitterness. When the last of them was gone, I walked out to the porch. The air felt lighter, the land breathing with me once more. Yet the scars remained not on the soil, but in my heart. Daniel lingered near the barn, his head bowed, shoulders sagging under the weight of his choices. He looked at me once, as if searching for forgiveness, but my eyes held only sorrow. Some wounds cannot be undone. I placed my hand on the railing, the wood rough beneath my palm. The farm was mine again. Scarred, battered, but still standing. Just like me, and though I had reclaimed it, one truth remained. Trust, once broken, is harder to rebuild than any barn or field. The first morning after the dust had settled, I rose before dawn. My body ached, but my spirit pulled me outside. The air was cool, kissed with the faint sweetness of dew. I stepped carefully down the porch steps, the cane steady in my hand, until my feet met the soil I had once feared was lost forever. It was damp beneath my slippers, rich and alive, the same earth that had carried me through storms and seasons, through birth and death, through love and betrayal. I closed my eyes and inhaled, letting the scent of morning grass, soil, and the faint smoke of the wood stove fill my lungs. For the first time in weeks, I felt whole. I walked slowly toward the fields, the horizon glowing with the first blush of sunrise. The sky was streaked with soft gold and lavender, as though the heavens themselves were painting a new beginning for me. I whispered into the wind, my voice fragile but firm. This farm is not just land. It is loyalty. It is memory. It is blood. Every furrow told a story. Every fence post held echoes of laughter, of tears, of promises whispered into the dark. This place was not a transaction. It was my life woven into the soil itself, and yet, as I walked, the pain lingered too. Betrayal leaves scars you cannot till under or wash away. My grandson's face haunted me, not the man who had signed my farm away, but the boy who once clung to my apron, calling me Mama Elena. I wondered if he would ever find his way back to that boy, or if greed had buried him forever. Still, I carried no hatred in my heart, just sorrow, and perhaps, somewhere deep down, the faintest ember of hope that one day he would understand the cost of what he had done. I turned toward the camera of memory, the eyes of those who might hear my story, and I spoke as though the fields themselves bore witness. Betrayal, I said, does not always come from strangers. It often comes from the ones we love most, the ones we would give our lives for. And that pain, the pain of being cast aside by your own blood, cuts deeper than any wound. The sun crested higher, bathing the fields in gold. I lifted my chin, feeling its warmth on my face, a reminder that even in the aftermath of betrayal, life endures. The farm endures. And so do I. I pressed my palm to the soil, whispering my vow to it once more. You are mine, and I will protect you until my last breath. Then, with a steadying breath, I spoke directly to those who had walked with me through this story. If my story touched you, please subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments. You're not alone in this.